disability is really about, it's not so much as there being something wrong with me. It's about, I want to be able to do things. And so, what is the missing gap that prevents me from doing those things? For example, I have a disability, not because I have a hearing disability, because my ears don't work, which is actually my disability, but I am disabled because when I go on Instagram, some videos are not captioned and I cannot participate. So it's really about context for disability. So if I go to a bar, for example, it's easy for me to go to the bar. I am not disabled in that context. But for a friend in a wheelchair, maybe there is a stoop to get to the entrance. So for me, disability is really about context. It's about, as Adriana said, it's about being able to have access to an experience, having access to an app, having access to a tool that everyone is able to do or use. And then for some reason, the way my body is designed is preventing me from being able to do that. So that would be disability for me.
Mm. Thanks, Mariela. That was a great kind of overview of the social model of disability, which I think is a really important framing of disability, and in terms of accessibility as well as bridging that gap that you described. Uh, Kyle, I would love to hear your thoughts on accessibility and disability as well.
Sure. I often describe accessibility very much in line with what Adriana said about accessibility, meaning that full stop, everybody can use the products that you design or build. They shouldn't exclude anybody. And the way we operationalize that is by saying someone should be able to use your product at the same time with the same ease of use as someone without a disability, right? And some of that draws on the legal and social and different kind of ways we can look about that, but it takes out a lot of the jargon and makes it easier to understand that if somebody has to fill out a form and it has 2 screens and 3 fields, it shouldn't take someone with a disability 10 times longer to do it, or to call someone on a phone, right? You should be able to do it relatively in the same way with the same ease of use. You might have to do it a little bit differently with assistive technology or with other accommodations that are needed, but products that don't exclude people and make them easy to use are accessible.
Yeah, that's so important, that it's not only that it's possible, but also that it's equitable and that it's actually on par with the experience that non-disabled people would have as well. Well, Ebony is actually is our 5th panelist. She's going to be joining us in just a few minutes. And so we'll fold her in when she gets here. But in the meantime, Kyle, would love to stick with you as we go on to our next question, kind of thinking about the context of COVID-19 and the work from home context that so many of us have been experiencing for the past year. Kind of, could you speak to either your personal experience or those that you understand others, perhaps in your workplace or in your communities, people with disabilities? How are we experiencing this radical change to work from home? Are there ways in which it's more accessible, less accessible?
Sure. I think, as with many things, it's both at the same time. With excuse me, with talking specifically about digital accessibility, early on in the pandemic, I think there was a huge focus for people kind of getting the importance of digital accessibility. I've worked in this field for well over a decade, and people often fail to understand the kind of gravity of, if something's not accessible, you don't get access to the technology, you don't have access. So much of the world that we live in is online these days. Well, in the past 12 months, everybody has understood that more than ever, that if you don't have access to the technology that we're all using to communicate, for online meetings, virtual classes, then you don't have access. And so I think, as with many things in the past 12 months, it magnified deficiencies where we have them in systems, in software platforms, in kind of stylistic ways that we might do something. So I think that it's been a huge kind of elevator of the issue of digital accessibility, but sometimes we still have issues. Even in the past few weeks is our government's work to roll out vaccines. It's great. It's helpful. It's something that's really needed and is going to help get us to where we need to go. And yet almost every state registration system where you sign up for vaccines has major accessibility issues, whether they have poor contrast or the fields where you need to enter your name or important information aren't labeled. So people with disabilities, to get these life-saving vaccines that are going to help us move beyond this, are then locked out of getting exactly what's needed because of inaccessible products. So I think it magnifies kind of disparities in what we have, while it still kind of elevates the importance and shows how making things accessible can provide equity.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for sharing that perspective. Adriana, any thoughts on kind of either the downfalls or successes, or just generally how you've experienced accessible technology for you and your community during the pandemic?
Yeah, so I would just like to echo what Kyle said, right? It sort of leveled the playing field for so many of us. There were people who were posting how for the first time they got to celebrate certain holidays with family members because it was on Zoom and they didn't have that physical barrier of going to their homes. Also, people who may not be so visibly disabled from the chest up, like paraplegics, when they use Zoom for business meetings, especially entrepreneurs with disabilities, no one knows that they have a disability. And so there's that, again, it leveled the playing field. Typically, when you roll into a business meeting, the first thing the person sees is your wheelchair. And so there's this whole other factor that comes into play where they have these stigmas or preconceived ideas. But on Zoom, they don't see the wheelchair. And they, that doesn't even come in the picture at all. And it's just a typical business meeting. I think also people with disabilities have been asking for accommodations to work at home. And many employers would say, oh no, we can't do that. And now it happened. And so now people can say, yes, you can do it. We've been doing it for a year now. So there's no excuse. The downfall is with schools, children with disabilities, those in special ed, who need the one-on-one programming, who need more than just the typical technology that is available to other students. That's where the downfall is right now. And I don't have an answer of how to fix that, but that is the downfall of this whole situation.
Absolutely, so much nuance to tease apart there, and certainly the chronic illness community, which I am a part of, there was both kind of delight and extreme frustration when it was all of a sudden people realized that when everyone's health was impacted, we could make it work to work from home when that had been denied for so long. So yes, am personally hopeful that that is going to be able to stick around and create more accessible and inclusive workplaces going forward as well. Mina, would love to hear any additional thoughts you might have on accessible tech impacted by COVID.
Sure, yeah. I think for me, the work from home situation has been so good because like the first time the Zoom meetings and the Teams meetings and etc., like I could type my thoughts out instead of speaking for like 2 hours continuously in a meeting. So like of my past 4 or 5 jobs and everything, like when I would go into the meeting room, everybody expected me to talk, and like sometimes it just gets way too so tiring to talk all the time. Speaking for me takes a lot of energy and a lot of my strength. So when we turned to these Zoom meetings, I could just chat my thoughts out, and like just made so much of a difference. So I'm still trying to think that when we do go back to in-person working again, like I'm still trying to think of ways I could still do the typing and then still collaborate. So yeah, then the working from home, it has been a game changer for me, certainly. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for sharing that. Again, teasing the nuance apart here really is important, and so many of us can experience accessibility in different ways, benefits as well as downfalls during this time. But we're glad to hear that experience. Mariella, any other thoughts on this topic?
I think for me, it has been both an amazing thing and a terrible thing. I'll start with the bad things first. For me, my hearing disability is an invisible disability, which means that I am able to have this conversation with you. My disability is invisible because my hearing equipment, I can just put my hair down and have a conversation with you. You wouldn't even know. And so now that all these conversations moved to Zoom, that meant that the ease in conversation that I previously had was no longer there. And so when we initially did that transition into Zoom, Zoom up until recently did not provide AI generated captioning, which means that I was having these conversations without the accessibility features that I would have needed to be successful. And so it was about changing the culture of the organization I was working with to get the entire organization to transfer from using Zoom to using Google Meet, which had the captioning capability. So right there, it again goes into a context of what is your disability, because for me, a Zoom conversation is difficult without captioning. But for someone like me now, for example, the hearing aspect may not necessarily be an issue, whereas for me it is. So it's like the context of disability in other senses, because my hearing disability is my only disability. It really targeted the weakest part of myself and my ability to communicate and work. So that was the negative. But in the positive, working from home, having more flexibility, having more ability to really manage and be responsible for my time has been amazing. And disability advocates have been talking about this for years. So to finally see corporate organizations roll this and possibly maybe even make it a permanent part of the future of work is incredible. So I'm both really excited and a little bit scared, just because of the context of my disability prefers that I go back to in-person meetings. So I'm not entirely sure how I feel about the whole thing.
Thanks for sharing that. And especially that piece about your self-advocacy and needing to basically create organizational change in order to pave a path for your own access. On the one hand, of course, that's so hard because we don't want marginalized people to have this extra burden. And we know that in reality, those of us with disabilities, self-advocacy is part of our lives and our journey. So any kind of additional like thoughts or advice that you might have for someone who's in a position where they need to self-advocate like that?
So the one thing that I will tell someone is that, and this is something that was told to me, you don't have to be the hero. You don't have to be the hero. If you are struggling in an environment where you are at a disadvantage and you are just, you know what, I don't need captioning. I'm just going to prove to myself I can do it. You're making your life more difficult. And advocacy is hard. Going up to your supervisor and admitting, hey, I have a hearing disability. This is hard for me. That takes a lot. And disability is so stigmatized in the workplace. And it's really hard. It took me over 20 years to say I have a disability. That is a really long time. And so it's just about acknowledging that you just need assistance, acknowledging that you just need services. There's nothing wrong with you. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you don't know your job. You know these things. And sometimes you just need a little bit of help, and that's okay. Um, and you are entitled to those things under the law. So advocate for yourself, like make space for yourself so that you are included, because you do not have to be the hero. You do not have anything to prove to anybody, and you need services, period, non-negotiable. So that would be advice that I wish somebody had told me like a decade ago, instead of me having to just kind of like make myself small and try to fit into this environment that were not meant for me, and where I just needed accessibility to be included.
It's really powerful. Thank you, Mariela. We're seeing some underlines on your comments in the chat. And Ebony, hello, welcome. How are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
I am wonderful. Great to meet you virtually, face to face for the first time, and welcome to our panel. We've given you Ashley introduced you earlier, so folks are familiar, but would love to fold you into this conversation. Our question that we've posed is kind of, how have accessible technologies been impacted by the pandemic, generally speaking?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think I'd love to talk on that, but I'd also love to drop in the chat here for everyone that little piece about self-advocacy. I remember I was first diagnosed with lupus when I was 16, and exactly as Mariella mentioned, I ignored having a disability for as long as it would let me, and then eventually it wouldn't let me anymore. But these two programs, Lyme Connect, which is a national, actually international, we just added Canada, an international nonprofit focused on the professional and personal development of people with disabilities, has really helped me come into my own as a person with disability. And inclusionclearinghouse.org is just a treasure trove of resources for helping cultivate your story, not only for yourself, but how you share it to other people. Because I think, as Mariella mentioned, the first step is getting it in your own heart, and then the second is sharing it with others. So I think those are two resources that really helped me through my disability journey. And then, would you mind repeating the question?
Absolutely, and thank you so much for those resources. So we were just talking about the pandemic and all of the changes that we've experienced and how that has ended up impacting accessibility. It could be on a personal level or thinking more about your community or your workplace.
Absolutely. That's a really nuanced question. Thank you, Natasha. So I'd say, honestly, and it always feels kind of strange to say it because I know COVID has had so many negative impacts, but my life has been a little bit better in terms of accessibility since we went to work from home. I work at a large employer called Google, but we were able to go to work from home back in March. And since then, my fatigue, I've been able to keep it under control a lot better, because in the past, you don't really want to sneak away from the office and take a 5-minute nap because that looks awkward. It looks like you're sleeping on the job, because you are. But now, because we're working from home, I can literally get into my own bed. Like, that just changed everything. I bet my productivity has shot up. And I think that that's the other half of COVID, is like, there's been such a negative side, but there have been some positives in terms of flexibility and autonomy and how you both discover, accumulate, and utilize your accessibility accommodations. So that's been a huge benefit for me.
Amazing, yes, and a theme that we're hearing in general is just teasing apart those nuances. And people with disabilities, we are not a monolith, and our experiences are so varied. And would love to just stick with you again, Ebony, and kind of on this topic. I think the cultural understanding of disability does remain fairly narrow, and I was wondering if you could kind of speak to why it is so important that we broaden our collective notion of disability, and maybe some of the ways that stereotypes can kind of flatten that diversity.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think for that question, I'd refer back to some of my experiences as a consultant for different divisions within Google and different teams across the tech industry. I'll come and talk to them about UX, specifically user experience on the tech side. And so many times, the only thing they ever want to talk about is blindness, which is huge. It's very important. But I'm also like, I'm not necessarily blind, but I have a lot of fatigue in seeing you flash something at me 800 times when I go onto your website. I don't want to be on your website anymore, so you will not be getting my money. So just like helping people understand that as you mentioned, the narrow but the breadth of disabilities, and how when you only focus on solving for one type of person, you're only solving for one type of person, and really hitting that home. That, for example, a lot of time, like I'm not on the autism spectrum, but I work with that community a lot. So when I bring in that perspective to my clients, they're like, wait, this can affect somebody. And I think I heard it said really well recently, the reframing the conversation from how many users do you have to how many users are you harming, and so really thinking about how many people are you harming with your product, as opposed to just thinking about accumulating more and more. And I think that would help drive a more empathetic response to accessibility in tech, and not just seeing it as a legal requirement, but actually seeing it as a life changer.
Absolutely. Thanks for that language and kind of those visuals, and even helping us to wrap our minds around what that's like to create inclusive design. And would love to kind of stick on this topic. Kyle, I know you bring a great deal of background in the digital accessibility space. And for those of us who might be a little bit newer to it, would love if you might be able to share kind of a bit of an overview around digital accessibility and some common examples of digital accessibility needs that need to be considered.
Sure, happy to, Natasha. So as Ebony mentioned, I myself, right, I use a screen reader or super high contrast or magnification to look at things that'll help someone who's blind or low vision. But a screen reader reads out loud everything that's on a screen, right? So it can only do that if programmers build things with all the appropriate labels and structure to do it. As a screen, they're getting better, but a screen reader can't just say, I know what's here, right? They're pulling out the code and the labels and the buttons and the elements that programmers and content developers put into it. So that's why this is really important, right? For our computer science kind of students, or our programmers, or people who build websites, because every little thing that we're doing has an impact on the consumer using assistive technology. Mariella earlier mentioned captions, right? Super important when we're creating videos or putting a podcast online. That's going to help somebody that doesn't hear as well to be able to access content. Another kind of realm of disability that's often overlooked are people with various movement impairments, right? And there are many different ways that people use computers beyond just a mouse, especially, right? One of the main things we train people to do when they're practicing on making things technology, on making their own technology accessible, it's often referred to as take the keyboard challenge, right? Can you use your product without a mouse? And if so, it's going to be a lot better for accessibility. And one of the favorite times I worked with someone, this was several years ago at Harvard, but they weren't very familiar with accessibility. It was just in a general kind of HR meet and greet, and we were sitting at a table paired up randomly, and they sat down and said, "What do you do?" And I explained accessibility, and he told me, he said, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know it was accessibility, but that's what I want." he worked heavily in the financial sector, and he said, I hate when I go to a website or I do something and I've got to take my fingers off my keyboard. I want to use everything with keyboard shortcuts, and my, it was an example of, he wasn't the core demographic of accessibility, but building things for accessibility made it easier for him too. And the last one that I'll describe briefly, we encounter this a lot in education, but those people go on to get jobs, is learning disabilities, ADHD, dyslexia, right? Different kind of learning and cognitive impairments that can affect people. And there's no one size fits all of, oh, that's how we simply make things accessible, right? But having fewer flashes on a screen can make it easier for someone who might have epilepsy. But you know what? They also help the field hockey player that had a concussion and is trying to recover. The same technologies that allow me as a blind person to read my computer really help someone who has dyslexia to read more efficiently. So there's no one technology that just affects one person with a disability, but it's kind of using common standards and practices. And then people with disabilities are able to find the right assistive technology that kind of helps them plug in and use technology in the best way they can.
Super helpful. Thanks, Kyle. And we had a comment from Danica about the importance of ASL interpretation, and in addition to captions as well. And
totally.
Kyle, I really like, you described something that I think is often called the curb cut theory, and this notion that curb cuts on sidewalks, were designed primarily to support wheelchair users, and they can also support someone pushing a stroller or pulling a wheeled luggage behind them. And that when we build with inclusion in mind, we don't just serve the people, that a narrow portion of the population, but actually we are creating opportunity. We're making it better for everyone. And kind of on that train of thought, Mina, I'd love if you could share a little bit more with us about inclusive design, and if there are any kind of particular product examples that come to mind of teams that have been able to build products with inclusive design in mind from the very beginning.
Sure, yeah, I can try to share a slide, and I don't know, there's my computer. Okay. So I just want to share a bit about inclusive design. So what I try to tell people is that accessibility focuses on the outcome of a product, but on the other hand, inclusive design, it furthers that notion, and it aims to recognize solutions that work for diverse populations. Accessibility guidelines, they are bound by laws. They don't take into account the human experience. So, for example, I know so many people are on this app called Clubhouse these days. Then when I tried to use the app, it was just so hard for me to contribute and to make a connection because a person at speech impairment like me, it was not a very user-friendly platform. Then I did speak to some of my friends who were deaf. Then the application has no captions, so they found it hard to communicate write the application too. So inclusive design is learning from your users, speak to your target audience, and recognize inclusion. A few months back, when I interned at Microsoft, I got a chance to speak to the co-founder of the Xbox adaptive controller. On the slide on the right side, there was a picture of the Xbox adaptive controller. It is specifically designed for people with motor impairments. The co-lead of the controller, he told me a very good sentence, which goes that they designed with the target population, not for the target population. So when you include people with disabilities in your design process, that is inclusive design. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. And it's such a great point you made, Mina, about, the ADA is so important and having these legal protections as a protected class. And we know that when you're building technology, if your sole goal is to be legally compliant, you're going to miss a lot of opportunity to design with folks in mind and in conjunction with folks, and to really go beyond the letter of the law, frankly. So thanks for that example of that Microsoft product as well. And a couple of great comments in the chat. I just wanted to pull out. Both Mariella and Adriana have ideas for Clubhouse users when it comes to captions using Google Live Transcribe or Otter.ai. So always glad to disseminate good info like that. And Adriana, would love to move on. And obviously you have founded a company and developed an assistive technology that increases access for people with disabilities to use mobile devices. And so we've got a lot of developers in the audience and would love to know, what's the one thing, or a few, but really what's that one thing that you want every mobile developer to be keeping in mind?
So I think Mina pretty much just said that. I believe Kyle said it as well. Basically everyone has said that. But first of all, don't let accessibility be an afterthought, right? If you do it from the beginning, first of all, it's good business to do it from the beginning. It saves money, it saves time. So it's a really good business decision to think about accessibility when you're designing an app in the beginning, so you don't have to take the time to go back and redo a lot of the things that you've already done. Another thing is actually have people with real disabilities involved in that process. There's a phrase, nothing about us without us. And that applies to everything. It should apply to everything with regards to accessibility. And so, yeah, for developers, just, get people with real disabilities to be involved, to be on your team. There are very talented coders with disabilities, so have them involved on your team. And yeah, I mean, that is the biggest part, is for, thinking about it from the beginning and have people on your team that have disabilities.
Absolutely. Thank you. And of course, the disability employment rate is something like only 29% last I looked. And that's why disability employment is often at the forefront of the conversations that we have, not only around building accessible technology, but hiring people with disabilities to do it in the tech industry and beyond. So thanks for those thoughts, Adriana.
Yeah.
And Mariella, I know you've got a lot of big ideas. You're a big idea person. And so would love to just kind of open it up to you and hear what are some of the big ideas that you have around increasing access for people with disabilities?
I have often said that with disability, it's really about do what you can, where you are, with what you have. It's really easy to get carried away with policy, with technology guidelines, with this legal documents that are really dense to read and not fun to look at all, unless you're into disability like me. But I think that one of the big challenges really is that we often forget that people don't have a lot of time. And I think that if we just focus on doing the minimum, for me, the minimum is captioning. And so very often, a lot of people don't know how to create caption videos. They're just like, oh, this is cool, but it's probably a lot of work, and they kind of just move on. So what I do with Project Hearing is, how do I take this thing that may take you 5 minutes or 10 minutes or maybe a month to learn and break it down in a 30-second video that is fun, that is engaging, that is sexy, that you like, oh, this is cool. And I learned something today, and you're able to take that and move on with your life. And I think that advocacy is hard, but not being included is also hard. You have to choose your heart. And I wish I didn't have to advocate. I wish I didn't have to educate people on how to do caption videos and how to create these guidelines. But one of the things that I believe is that there are tools and there are resources. And that's one of the things I do with Project Hearing. We provide monthly workshops on how to caption. Putting these things together takes time. And if you're interested in learning how to be a better ally, you'll find these resources. So really taking the time to right now doing what you can with what you have in front of you. There are tools like threads that you can use to make Instagram videos. There are tools like Kapwing, and I will list them all in the chat. But there are tools that exist for everyone to make a difference and create an accessible world. You don't have to go out and make a website. You can just make sure that the next video you post on social media is captioned. Like, that's a simple thing that everyone here can do today. Like, don't try to fix this big problem. Just do what you can where you are with what you have and start there. So my advice to developers and designers, and just really if you're a human in general, is focus on the minimum and focus on what is right in front of you and what you have access to be a better ally, instead of solving this huge giant problem of inaccessibility.
Super powerful. Thank you so much for that paradigm shift. um, Ebony, would love to hear from you. You've talked about some of the resources you've leaned on, like Lyme Connect, that we actually connected through, and what it's like showing up in the workplace as a person with a disability. How would you say that having an accessibility lens has impacted your career?
Ooh, big question there. I think it has primarily opened doors for me that I never knew the house existed. So for example, Lyme Connect, I was already relatively interested in working in technology, but being able to capitalize on the resources available to people with disabilities. So I think, I don't have the stats behind me, but I feel like this has got to be a pretty decent time to be a person with disability. There's a lot of energy around it. There's a lot of more regulatory and legislative action around it. So I think this is a time to really capitalize on that aspect of yourself. But I also feel like it's created opportunities for me in terms of intersectionality. I am a Black woman from the South with a disability. And so all of that doesn't always equate to the most opportunities in the world. But I think by really seeing myself in a different light, and as Marielle said, having that paradigm shift of doing what was it, do what you can where you are with what you have. Love that. Gonna get a t-shirt with it. I think it has just helped me reframe the way I look at different opportunities and how I show up, because I also make sure to always go into a room, and that's one of the first things that comes up during my introduction, because I feel like it's important to bring that into the conversation, because my race enters the room immediately, but my disability doesn't always have to. And I feel like by stepping into my experience as a person with disability, it also can sometimes give kind of the space for other people to say, oh, I have a disability too. I didn't know if that was relevant. I didn't know if that perspective was something that was going to be valued here. And I'm telling you, just through the way that I'm bringing it up, that it is valued. I want you to bring that in, because it can help us create and brainstorm even better solutions that are more multidimensional and probably more effective for the society at large.
That's super phenomenal. I'm glad to hear it. I've had a similarly positive experience. I remember how scared I was. I was working at Adobe and there was no ERG at the time. And I was the first person in of 25,000 people to be like, I have a disability. And I was crying in the bathroom prior to the community event, because I was going to sit at this desk and self-identify, and I didn't know what the future was going to hold for me. And you know what? It was positive, and people were supportive, and the ground didn't break beneath me. And just hearing other people be able to share those experiences, I think is so, so powerful. Thanks, Ebony. Let's see, Kyle, I would love, we've talked a little bit about self-advocacy. I'd love to hear kind of about digital accessibility advocacy from your perspective. So kind of what recommendations do you have for developers who want to be advocating for accessibility on their teams or at their companies?
Sure. So there are several levels that I think about this of, right? So Mariella rightly pointed out that we all have to kind of do what we can where we are. But when most of us, right, there are startups and small companies, but many of us here have talked about how we work for large organizations or multi-person teams, right? And so it involves us getting outside of ourselves to think about how we can make accessibility. We can't be the only person working on it. In my organization, there are literally tens of thousands of people who create the products that when you go to a website or a research symposium, that's what's the face of the university. So I think first, it is a responsibility of those of us working on things. We don't have to be lawyers. We probably shouldn't be lawyers all the time, but accessibility is the law, right? We can't discriminate on people based on disability, and our products shouldn't either. And so I think it was Mina or Adriana earlier mentioned, we have to think about accessibility from the start, from designing for it. We don't want to design a product that is going to discriminate against people or that companies won't be able to buy. My company, every day, we have to say no to vendors. We won't buy your product because some of our people in our community can't use it. If a blind student or a deaf student or a student with a mobility impairment, if they're not going to be able to use this product that you're trying to sell me to register for a class or to buy athletic tickets or to do a mobile remote science experiment or something like that, right? So if you want to have access to the full market of potential users, it's an imperative that it needs to be accessible. So even if you don't know all the nuances of the law, I think it is important to have people willing to speak up and tell leadership of the company they're working on. You may not know this, but like, if you want to sell our product to anybody in a government or education or anywhere else, like, accessibility is a thing, and they're going to hold you to it. On a more kind of individual level, I think it is a matter of getting to know the communities. I love what Mina said earlier about designing with people with disabilities, not for. It's never a good idea to unveil a product and say, I hope it works, right? For someone with a disability, kind of incorporating feedback, ideally from employees with disabilities, right? Including people in the process all the way. But thinking about it from the very beginning and testing and iterating so that we're thinking about people from the start. It's an inclusive design experience overall.
Super helpful. Yeah, and there is that kind of that influence to step into that does take some courage and some info and some data to back up, but ultimately is going to create a better outcome for the organization and probably for that individual who is amplifying their career path as well.
Totally. It can be risky to step out and take some bravery or courage, but you can be confident that if you do that, you're right. So it's not always easy to say, but it's totally the truth.
You heard it here, folks. Totally. Let's see, Adriana. So you mentioned like a really important point earlier, which is nothing about us without us. And unfortunately, we know that a lot of the initiatives and organizations that do surround disability aren't actually led by people with disabilities. So as a founder with a disability, would love if you could just kind of share anything about your experience that you'd like to, or kind of any advice that you might have for other founders with disabilities.
So yeah, there's not enough time to share that. But you know, for people with disabilities who are entrepreneurs, we tend to have to prove ourselves even more so. And then put on top of that, I myself am a woman, and I'm a woman in tech who happens to have a disability. Or if someone like Mina or Mariella or Ebony, a woman of color and in tech, right? With a disability. It's the trifecta right there. We always tend to have to prove ourselves much more so than the average entrepreneur, to begin with. And then also, you know, depending on what you're working on, like myself, I'm working on something relevant to myself. And when we were doing the testing, I was not involved in it at all. That way I could not influence the results of those tests, right? Because we wanted real feedback from real users. So as an entrepreneur with a disability, if you are solving a problem that you yourself are facing, right? That's how this all started for me. But you're also designing not just for yourself. So when you go through those iterations and testing processes, you definitely want to step away and have other people who can be unbiased and just, you know, take the data, take the feedback for what it is. Yeah, so that's one of the major things I think as a founder with a disability. If you're solving your own problem, when you're developing a product, definitely have other people test it, but without your involvement in that testing process. And again, the initial thing that I said was, you know, we have to prove ourselves. Most VCs, venture capitalists, or any investor, it is so hard to get an investor as an entrepreneur with a disability. For the most part, they want to see you succeeding, and they want to see an actual product on the market and succeeding and making a profit. But if you get to that point without an investor, why would you even need an investor at that point, right? Whereas a non-disabled person, and especially a non-disabled white male, they can go and pitch an idea, and typically, more often than not, that investor will write a check right then and there, pretty much. So it's, you know, it's just really difficult.
Yes, truth to the difficulty of fundraising, and especially for those of us that come from underrepresented backgrounds, and also really appreciated your advice on not only building a product that solves your own problem. I think for anyone developing any kind of product, that's great advice to remember, to be keeping other folks in mind as well. And with that, really, I would love to open it up and see if there's anyone else out there. I have more questions. I know that I could talk to these folks all night, but we want to make sure that we get to your questions too. So Ashley and I had talked about throwing them in the chat, but we do have a fairly small number of people. So if anyone would like to get on Zoom and ask it, that would work for us as well. So just let me know, hit me up. Gonna hold some space.
Danica has her hand up.
Oh, thank you. I'm missing something. I'm not seeing that, but Danica would love to hear your question.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for sharing all this valuable information today. And I just wanted to share as a deaf person how much I appreciate hearing from the Project Hearing organization. Thank you. And also, I wanted to ask you about me personally as a deaf person, what are good resources or good connections for people in general to communicate these things to people, because my passion is advocacy, and my passion is being able to help people cross that, create that bridge between two worlds. So I have the hearing world and the deaf world, and I'm obviously able to speak, and I have a cochlear implant, and I sign. So I'm very interested in developing more of an awareness and more of a platform for people. And so I just wanted to get some advice on how the best way to do that would be. Thank you.
Who was the question for, Danica? Who was the question for?
So it was just kind of a general, if anyone has any input about, what their experiences are, and how to become more connected to the community, and how to build in general, and how to build that connection with multiple people, and get my name to be aware, get people aware of how I feel about the community, and how to build that awareness about these technologies that we're talking about today, if that makes sense.
I'd love to tackle that. So one of the things that I've learned is that of all 7 billion people in the world, you're the only one that wakes up in the morning and you look in the mirror, and you're the only one of the 7 people in the world that has your experience. You're the only one that has lived in your body. You're the only one that know what your life is like with your disability. Nobody else has that. So for me, what I've learned, what has worked for me, is taking that experience, owning that experience. I started literally with my phone recording myself. I was at like one of the first videos I made was my phone in front of a water bottle talking about how I was going to take a trip to Mexico. This was pre-COVID. And how I was nervous about going to the airport and somebody, you know, talking to me and me not hearing or missing the gate. And I started a video with that with just 7 followers. And from 7 followers, 1.5 years later, I have almost 2,000 followers. And it's like 2,000 followers is like nothing. It's nothing. But it's 2,000 people that are now paying attention to me when I talk about Google Live Transcribe or on my phone, or how I go to the doctors and I communicate with the doctor. And like my experiences. So is capitalizing on your experiences, starting an Instagram Live, getting on Facebook, and just talking with people. So I would say start with that and own your own story.
Gotcha.
Can I add to that as well? To the social media, there's so many groups on social media, such as Facebook, and there are a ton of groups on Facebook for people with disabilities, for activism. So yeah, I mean, the choices are endless when it comes to that and getting involved. Clubhouse definitely is a way to get involved. We have the disability community has literally exploded on Clubhouse. And it's been great because we're actually helping make the app more accessible for all people. So we've been pushing directly with the developer of Clubhouse to make it more accessible. And that's how the improvements have been happening, because of our direct connection with that person that we made. We made an effort to make it happen. So just using your voice, like Mariellas said, you know, posting a video on social media, and it just grows from there. Yeah.
Can I chime in on that, Natasha?
Good.
So I agree with what Adriana and Mariellas said. I think it should never be the responsibility of any of our marginalized identities to kind of have ownership for why technology creators or product owners are kind of excluding people. I, as a blind person, shouldn't have to be responsible for always pointing out to a developer, you didn't build your app to use voiceover, right? Or something like that. And yet, Danica, your question was, how can you kind of put yourself out there? And as frustrating as that can sometimes be, talking to people and speaking up about your challenges is how we make progress. Adriana earlier said nothing about us without us, right? It's people standing up and taking collective action sometimes when they need, and that can mean really big movements, but it can also mean really small things. I think some of the companies and large institutions or startups that have some of the biggest impacts on people with disabilities are founded or have people in key positions that know someone with a disability. So just because you get to know somebody in a community organization or a religious institution or your school, right? Getting to know people and share your experience with them can have an impact far beyond yourself of impacting products and technology and how they affect people with disabilities.
Thank you.
One more. I think, Danica, obviously your question was fantastic. We all want to throw in on this, but I think one of the things to definitely keep top of mind is when you're thinking about developing a platform and developing a following, make sure you understand your root reason, not just at like a surface level, like I want to, and I know this isn't probably where you're coming from, like I want to be famous, but like, why do you want the platform? And would it make sense to potentially support someone like Mariella, or support and volunteer with a group that's already there,
Right.
build your name within an established group, as opposed to developing on your own. Because I found myself in a lot of different situations. I thought, man, no one knows me, and like no one wants to hear my thoughts on the matter, but that's okay. And I wasn't able to support other initiatives, and I moved my efforts in different directions. So just remember that being famous isn't the only goal. And if you have a real reason in your heart that says, hey, I'm the one, like a person that comes to mind is maybe Serena Williams. Like there's a reason that her platform is huge, because she was one of the first major Black women in tennis. So that makes sense. And so she had that reasoning. So make sure you know your reasoning. And once you have that we viewers of yours and fans of yours will attach to that, and we will begin to seek you out, as opposed to you seeking out the platform.
Gotcha. Thank you. And that makes sense. And I just really just want to make a difference and just bring that attention to the community and things that I want to have happen. And it's not really about being famous or anything. It's more about just bringing more attention to the deaf community and the disability community as well. So.
Phenomenal. Thanks, Danica. And in the comments, we have a couple of other communities to join. Mina has a professional Facebook group for professionals with disabilities, and another woman, Tiffany Yu, has founded a Facebook group called Diversibility that Donna shared. So thanks for those resources as well. I've got a couple of direct messages, and then I see Eric had a hand raised as well. Ebony, we have a question for you here. How has it been being a Black woman in the industry, and have you ever felt that you had to hide your disability?
Ooh, someone's throwing the kickers out there. So I'd say being a Black woman in tech, feels kind of like being an apple in a pumpkin patch. Like you kind of fit the bill to a degree, but we're really not sure why you're here. Sometimes I do get that sense of like, for example, I've had experiences where when we're divvying out work and it's a major project with a lot of different moving parts, people say, oh, Ebony, obviously you're going to want to work on DEI. And I'm like, actually, I'm quite well trained in consulting, operations. I have some financial credentials. I can do a lot of things. So I think having to constantly, as I think, Kyle said it so well when he mentioned that there's kind of an assumption that you'll do the work. And I think the other half of the issue there is there's the assumption that you'll do it for free. And I think luckily we're beginning to have that conversation around payment for people with disabilities for our efforts, because I can only think about how many times I've been reached out as an accessibility and disability ally and advocate that say, hey, we'd love for you to work on this study. We'd love to have your disability perspective. I say, fantastic. What's your rate? What are you paying? And they say, well, we just thought it was a good idea. And I think that is not a good idea. So it's just kind of reframing that, changing the conversation. I think we're at the beginning of the conversation shift of not asking for free labor for DEI work. And when I say DEI, as a reminder, that's diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as a Black woman in tech, I think it's a beautiful opportunity to be an apple in a pumpkin patch and show the value of apples, even though the inherent value of apples should never have been questioned.
Wow, you put that incredibly beautifully. Thank you so much for sharing that perspective. Eric, do you have a question?
Sure, Natasha, thank you. Great panel, great discussion, everyone. It's a thrill to be here. I am curious, clearly many of us are strong advocates in the disability space. I have noticed, interestingly, that in times where DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, inclusive practices are, very kind of emphasized and like a heavy focus. At times it seems, ironically, that disability of an identity group as an identity group is, sometimes the one identity that's overlooked even in those conversations about diversity, inclusion, and belonging and things like that. And so I'm curious what others think about kind of the future, or when we think of how disability advocacy is evolving, do others have thoughts on, ways to kind of make sure that disability is consistently being included in those conversations. It's really interesting that, disability sometimes is the one that is either overlooked and forgotten in those conversations. And so how do we go about addressing that as a community?
I'd like to hop in with something super quick. So one thing that is kind of a relatively easy lift, I'll say. So for example, I'm a shareholder of a stock. I don't know if I'm allowed to say it, but I got an email recently saying, vote for the next board members because they're having to refresh their board. So I then looked up all those board members, and most of them didn't have a disability stance. But if someone has a negative disability stance, guess who's asking for their resignation? Because if you are a shareholder, you can actually take your power and utilize it and capitalize on it in our capitalist society. You can make the most of it. So, but I am aware that owning stock is not an available option for all people, both financially and just having access to stocks. But if you have access to that, vote people out. Use your power.
Nice.
I think I'd like to add, actually, I think this is how this or at least I was invited to this panel, is because I was speaking in a more general, and Ashley, please correct me if I'm wrong, of how we met, because it was a while ago. But I was, again, back to Clubhouse. It all goes back to Clubhouse now. But I was speaking, when I first joined Clubhouse, I was in rooms related to tech and entrepreneurship and, just general things like that. And all they talked about was exactly, race and gender and sexual, identity or whatever, but never disability, right? It's never disability. And so I would go up on the stage and be like, hello, there's those of us that have disabilities, and that's part of diversity and inclusion. So I think just speaking out in general places, that are not specific to disability or anything like that. And like Ebony said, you read people's bios. If you are a member of a board or things like that, and you're looking for new board members, Carrie is on this call, Carrie Larson, who is a fellow board member with me on Easter Seal. And we thoroughly look at people before voting them in to make sure that, they will champion the cause and champion people with disabilities. Otherwise, they don't belong in that group.
The one thing I will add to that will probably be, don't talk, and my boyfriend says when I say this, but my mentality with this stuff is don't talk about it, be about it. So a lot of people want to be allies. Again, focus on what you can do. If you have access to stock, like Bonnie, fantastic. If you are able to start a business like Adriana, fantastic. If you can hire people with disabilities, do that. If you can put a panel together for disabilities like Ashley and Natasha are doing, do that. If you can create a caption video after this, talking about accessibility and making sure that the next conference you go to has captioning and be there in this platform, like do that. Like focus on what you can do. Don't talk about it, be about it. Like solve the problem in a way that you can with what is accessible to you. Natasha and everyone else, I have to jump off. I'm going to drop off my email in the chat. It has been amazing to talk to all of you today.
Thank you so much, Mariella. It's been amazing. See you soon. Everyone follow Project Hearing on Instagram if you have a chance. So So we do have some folks that have been DMing Natasha still, and I know one of my colleagues has a question. Ethan, I don't know if you want to unmute yourself or chat. Natasha, you can do either.
Thanks, Ashley. I was
Actually,
actually,
Ethan, I'm so sorry. Can I pause you super quickly? I'm just going to read an answer from Mina to our last question before we move on.
Oh, okay. Yes. Sorry, I didn't see that.
No, no worries. Thank you so much. So Mina says, statistics are very important to make sure disability is included and diversity as well. According to a report by Accenture, GDP could get a boost of $25 billion if 1% more people with disabilities join the workforce. Statistics from another report say that organizations must focus on disability engagement, they're growing sales 2.9x faster and profits 4x faster than their peers. So again, I do think that is a great point, Mina, and she links to reports here because data does matter, and sometimes we need to build a case. So thanks for that, Mina. And Ethan, passing it over to you.
yeah, no, thank you. So first off, thank you all for being here and sharing your experiences. This is so valuable and really appreciate you being here. So my question, I'm sure throughout your career, I know you've definitely had challenges that you've overcome. And I know working with our students, I work as a co-op career advisor here with our MSCS aligned population. I'll often find that our students, as new to the field of computer science, coming from previous or other industries, based on potential their backgrounds, etc., sometimes have feelings of imposterism or imposter syndrome. And I wanted to ask you, if you are okay sharing this, if you could talk a little bit more, if you have had those feelings in your career development over time and in your career overall, and how you have handled those. And that's for anybody on the panel. I'd love to hear from all of you.
Yes, this is a topic that's very prevalent amongst our student population at this time, especially for a program that we have called Align that's designed for folks who do not have a traditional background in CS, but are looking to transition into CS. So we have music majors, art majors, all types of majors going into CS. And so that's where the question stems from as well.
I'll try to chime in here a little or tackle this a little. I think most people have it, regardless whether you have a disability or not. You know, everyone experiences this along the way in any career that they get into, right? And yeah, I mean, like I said, we all experience it. Whether we admit it or not, that's a whole other thing. But you know, there are times where I'm doing stuff for Puffin, let's say, and along the way, and you know, as an entrepreneur, it's a roller coaster. And there are times where it's like, why am I doing this? Right? Like, I shouldn't be doing this. Or if I'm at an event and all these people have PhDs in, you know, AI and all this other stuff, and I don't have that. And that happens. But then I start talking to people, and I can hold my own in those conversations. But up until that point, you know, when you're first in those situations, yeah, I definitely experienced it. But I think, you know, it's all about knowing that you know what you know, I guess. That you're good at what you do, and also fake it till you make it. A lot of people do it and it works. My sister is in the entertainment industry, and she has a fake email account because she's not a big enough person to have an assistant. And so she uses that fake account to respond or to reach out to people to make it seem like she is more than she is. I mean, she is amazing, but people have that persona or that image of her that, oh wow, she has an assistant, like, we can't touch her, like we have to go through her assistant, but it's all her, right? And so that's another thing, is definitely fake it till you make it. And when you do make it, you don't realize it. Like, you really don't realize it. And it's when other people start reaching out to you, asking you to be on panels like this one, where I'm with people who work for Google and Microsoft, like that, and Kyle, you work for Harvard, like that's where I'm like, wow, right? For a minute, when I saw everyone's bios, I had that moment where I was like, do I belong on this panel? This is a perfect example. But I do, like I do, and it's amazing to have this conversation with all of you.
Yes, you do. You do belong. And I'm so happy I met you on Clubhouse. We've been talking about Clubhouse the whole time. At this point, Clubhouse needs to pay us.
I know,
Yes.
exactly. But
Yes,
anyway,
so happy. So
yeah,
happy.
I'll stop talking now. But that's basically my little experience and advice.
Nice.
I can try to like talk a bit about this too. So I'm not sure like if it's imposter syndrome or not, but then the one of the things like faced my life is that what will people think of my speech impairment? So for example, in my first on-campus interview for a large company, I like tried to hide my speech impairment. So the feedback that I got later was that we need somebody who can speak English. So I think like it was just kind of so weird because they somehow thought that my speech was a sign of like low skills and English language. So after I like spoke to some people and then got to know about accommodations and stuff. So nowadays in my job interviews and stuff, they provide me with a laptop. So the interviewer has a laptop too. We both share a dock, so I can type and like real time, and the interviewer can see that at the same time. So I think what worked the best for me is like accepting the fact that I do need accommodations. And like once I was just bold enough to ask for that, my imposter syndrome, like it just like went down. So if there is something that works for you, that better to do your job, I think you should definitely ask for it.
Awesome.
I love that, Mina. I've definitely faced experiences like that over time, I think, and I don't know if it ever goes away. And hopefully with anybody, no matter what career path you choose, you continually find ways to challenge yourself. And so sometimes, right, it might be you've found an entry-level position or whatever you're doing, and you get the skills you need, and as you push yourself beyond those kind of initial boundaries, you'll face some of those same challenges all over again. You get into a different room and you find yourself justifying your need for an accommodation, or that you deserve to be in the room, like Adriana was talking about, right? So I think probably the hardest but best advice is to be comfortable with yourself, which is hard sometimes, but to kind of know yourself and your limitations or accommodations that you might need, like Mina just referenced, and know the things that you are good at. So we mentioned about programming for accessibility, right? You can learn that and know it cold and know how to do it well, and there are people that want to hire for it, right? So being clear with yourself and being willing to learn things that you don't know, but also being confident and assured of yourself when you do know about things well, where you can add value and that.
I think I'd add only one more thing there, that I have found in some of my circles of friends that the conversation comes up that they feel like they should have imposter syndrome, even if they don't. So I'd caution you in ensuring that when you're putting out those resources, don't impress upon people that they should be having imposter syndrome, because that can actually cause imposter syndrome. I've seen it happen. It's awful for everybody. So support the people who need it. Let go of the people who don't. Let them live their best lives, I'd say.
Got a cat cameo.
Cat's here finally. Just gonna go.
Wonderful question, Ethan. Thank you so much, and for all of those great answers as well. Another question has come through. Have any of you all had an academic advisor or instructor or professor who you felt did a great job of advocating for people with disabilities? And if so, what did they do?
I think I do have one example of this. So I think like it was the first time when our like paper it was accepted for a poster competition or something like that. So until then, nobody really had asked me that, are you fine like speaking for 2 hours, these people who want to know more about your research, like no breaks or nothing. I do remember my one academic advisor, she sat down with me and she actually asked me like, are you fine with doing this? Like, is there something I can do to help, or do you need time breaks and between to speak? So I think like that was just so nice for her to ask that, because that was like in my freshman or my sophomore year of college. So I was still trying to hide my stutter and everything for somebody to just like ask, like just made so much difference. And I think that that experience, it helped me more to start asking for accommodations, I think. Yeah.
I think it says a lot that none of us can really answer this question. Like us not being able to, and Mina, you were really fortunate to have that experience, but the fact that there's complete utter silence to that question speaks volumes to the educational system and how children or people with disabilities are treated during that process.
So true. That's definitely true. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that question and for those answers. And I'm chatting with Ashley here, and we might end up just wrapping things up now if that works for folks. Was there any final thoughts that anyone wanted to add before I hand it over to Ashley?
I know this is kind of silly, but I'd love to ask the other panelists, including yourself, Natasha, if you want to get us started, who's your accessibility or disability inclusion hero?
Love this question, and I would be happy to get us started. Okay, I'm going to start with Ryan O'Connell. He is the writer, creator, star of a show on Netflix called Special. He's a gay man with cerebral palsy, and he is so funny. Honestly, I think I like his Instagram even more than his show, as much as I like his show. But he is, he's out there in Hollywood, and I'm really passionate about seeing disability representation on the big and small screen, and like the power of not just organic stories, which are so important, but also like the machine of Hollywood really pumping our stories into the culture. And so I think he's an awesome person who's kind of on the forefront of doing that.
Thank you. I just followed him. And then Kyle, if you want to go.
Sure. I think we have a lot of different people to look at. I'm not much of a hero person, kind of, but I've got a lot of mentors and people I like to look up to when it comes to work. We're all flawed in our own fun myriad of ways. But I work in higher education. I like research and scholarship and academia, and a scholar whose work I have followed a lot in recent years. His name's Jonathan Lazar, and he does a lot of research related to involving people with disabilities, including people with disabilities in the research. And I really like his work because he tries to, it's not just research for research sake, but it turns into policy action and advocacy for people with disabilities. And so it's research with a purpose that has kind of tangible impact on the world.
Thank you, Mina, for putting that in the chat. And then Adriana, if you had anything. Also, this is so helpful, y'all. Like I'm literally I'm typing as fast as possible to find these people.
Judy Human, of course, is like the queen, right? I mean, come on. And yeah, Robin as well. Robin is amazing as well. But that if we go into the entertainment industry, and Natasha, I wasn't even thinking along those lines, but now you made me think along those lines. But I really love Zach Anwar. he has CP. He's hilarious. He actually won some competition long time ago that Oprah had, if you wanted to create your own show. And so he's a wheelchair user, he has CP, and he's just hilarious because he, it's like making fun of we can all relate, those of us especially with a physical disability and more specifically with CP, can totally relate to all the skits that he does. And like he'd have workout Wednesdays and and he'd do these most ridiculous things, but it's just so relatable. And it was also a great representation of a real person with a real disability in the media. So yes, Judy Human and Zach Anwar is Zach Anwar is hilarious. Love him.
Thank y'all.
Do you have one, Ebony?
Yeah, who's yours?
Oi, don't do that. Okay, so the trick here is that I actually didn't have one, and that's the reason I wanted to ask. So now I have 5, so thank you.
Fair enough, fair enough. Well, big thanks to all of you. I so enjoyed getting to know folks on this call and getting to know some of you better. Ashley, you put so much work and effort into this. We're so grateful and would love to hand it over to you to close us out.
Okay, thank you everyone. This has been amazing. Thank you to all of the incredible panelists. You all have just been, this has been like chicken soup for me. You know, when like you eat chicken soup and it just feels good, it tastes good. That was the mood and it was really good. And I appreciate all of you for coming and speaking and just showing everyone how incredibly diverse tech is and that anyone can belong in tech. Especially to all the students that are still in this room, you belong here. And as you go off into your midterms tomorrow and in the rest of the week, just know that you belong in tech and that this panel just shows that even more and exemplifies that even more. So keep being you. And we're so excited. So thank you all for coming to this panel. I hope you come to many more identity series. And I will send all of you, every panelist information, whether it's a LinkedIn, whether it's a website. I've been doing my stalking. So I'll send you all of those links so that you can stay connected to all of the panelists as well. So bye everyone. Thank you so much for joining and we'll talk soon.